But while Republicans in Washington may be out of touch with the American people, who overwhelmingly in poll after poll after poll support raising the minimum wage, they do still have some powerful allies on their side, like the Koch-backed Americans for Prosperity, who plan to spend $125 million this year alone, in part to convince the American people that they are in fact wrong on the minimum wage. Part of an Americans for Prosperity strategy memo published in Politico reads in part, quote, "We consistently see that Americans in general are concerned that free market policy and its advocates benefit the rich and powerful more than the most vulnerable society. We must correct this misconception." Joining me now from California is Ron Unz. He's former publisher, the American Conservative, and chairman of the Higher Wages Alliance. Ron, you and I have spoken before. You've been waging a lonely, class traitorous campaign to get millionaires like yourself to support an increase in the minimum wage. You are apparently doing a good job.
Well, it's getting much less lonely every day. And when you have the Republican presidential nominee of the last election endorsing a hike in the minimum wage, we're talking about the mainstream of the Republican Party.
Well, what was interesting to me about the Romney comments from this morning was he actually had supported minimum wage early in that campaign cycle, was forced to back off it, perhaps not surprisingly, in the primary fight, and now seems to be coming back. And I wonder if that's a leading indicator or a lagging indicator of Republican opinion.
Well, he's not just alone out there. Remember, we have a Bill O'Reilly, the biggest conservative on Fox News, who's endorsed a minimum wage. A lot of the main publications, writers, for example, economic writers in the Daily Caller and National Review have endorsed a big hike in the minimum wage. It's basically the thoughtful conservatives, the thoughtful Republicans, the people who believe businesses should pay their own workers rather than forcing the taxpayers to pick up the difference by social welfare subsidies.
So then how do you account for the gap between what seems to be moving in the right direction among opinion leaders, among parts of the Republican establishment, among Republican thought leaders and conservatives, and the Republican elected leaders in Washington who filibustered a vote on it, wouldn't even allow a vote on it just a week ago?
Well, we've got to remember that lobbyists, business lobbyists who support those industries that are shoving the burden to the taxpayer, they're very influential in the halls of the legislature, and they're the people many of these congressmen speak to. They put on the fundraisers, and businesses would obviously rather not pay their own employees. They'd rather have the taxpayer do it, and that's really wrong. It's not conservative, and it's bad for America.
I thought it was interesting that Romney said, you know, we're for more jobs and higher wages. You've heard for a long time, there are certain conservatives who say, you know, we don't even think there should be any minimum wage. We think any minimum wage is a violation of basic free market principles about where the labor market sets the wage. And it's strange to me you don't see people forthrightly articulate that, even though I suspect there's a pretty big amount of Republicans who actually do believe that in private.
Well, a lot of the Republican ideology over the last 20 or 30 years has been captured by what might be called extreme free market libertarians. People believe there should be no regulations, no minimum wage, no standards in our society. And the result of that has been the tremendous impoverishment of so many tens of millions of Americans and American workers over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, I'm a conservative, but there's a difference between somebody who looks at things in a pragmatic, logical way, and somebody who's such an ideologue that he believes that all government regulations and requirements should be abolished. And that really is a problem in the Republican Party.
And that was the part of that AFP memo that was leaked today that made me sort of sit up and take notice, was an awareness even on the part of AFP, backed by the Koch brothers, that what they are selling people on is not going over very well.
Exactly. It's the dog food that dogs just won't eat. And again, we're not talking only about workers suffering because of a lower minimum wage. We're talking about the taxpayers suffering. Taxpayers right now are spending $250 billion a year on social welfare programs for the working poor, people who work but can't afford to survive and pay for their own families. If we raise the minimum wage, if we force businesses to pay a reasonable wage to those workers, the taxpayers would save tens of billions of dollars. And maybe that's part of what's motivating Romney, since he pays a lot of taxes himself.
Well, not according to Harry Reid. Ron Unz, former publisher of the American Conservative. Thanks for your time.
Great to be here.